Welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon or good evening wherever you are in the world. Welcome to this Dutch Fund for Climate and Development event. My name is Melody Tamarsians and I am your moderator for today. Together with me I have one speaker with me at the desk here, Aart Mulder, and we have more speakers joining us online that are going to take us through this event of an hour and a half. Well, we are here for the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development. And why is it so important that we have this fund? Because as we all know, climate change is one of the biggest challenges that we face today. It's already impacting a lot of people and a lot of nature across the globe. And specifically, it's impacting developing countries. This urgently called for a fund, and that's why we have the DFCD. But today we are here to also talk about the specific challenges that they set out for 3 countries, Uganda, Bangladesh, and today, Kenya. The 2 events we already had, they were recorded, so you can still watch them online if you go to the website. But for today, we're going to focus why we want to increase activities in Kenya. Why is it so important to do so? What does the challenge mean? How can you apply? And with all of our expert panel, we're going to learn also a little bit more about what you should take into account when you apply. What projects are we very excited about? What can we learn a bit more about projects that are currently running? And even more. But it's also very important for us that we interact together with you, all of our viewers across the globe. So please do interact with us. On your screen, you can see a box for your Q&A, for all your questions. Drop them in there. I'll be receiving them so that I can ask those questions to any speakers that we have with us. And if we don't get to answer them live, we will answer them online and you can find the answers then still. So without further ado, I think it's important to move on and talk about why we're here today and learn a bit more about the challenge in Kenya for today. First to say, the DFCD was funded in 2019, and it's a collaboration between FMO, the Entrepreneurial Development Bank, SNV, WWF, and Climate Fund Managers. So for today, we have Aart Mulder with us at the table here. You're the fund manager at DFCD, and you're going to tell us a little bit more about what the challenge is. So maybe let's actually start there. What is the challenge?
Yeah, thank you very much, Melody. What's the challenge? Well, actually, via this challenge, we invite everyone to come up with business models to address climate issues, in this case in Kenya. And if we talk about climate and climate issues, we distinguish between climate mitigation and climate adaptation. Both of them are relevant. Mitigation meaning actually how can we soften, calm down the increase of temperature worldwide. Adaptation is actually more the plan B, the alternative plan. Let's assume that the climate has already changed, which it has actually. What can we do to protect the environment, to protect the natural environment, the ecological systems, but also what can we do to enable people to be still resilient against all the effects of climate. And these 2 are equally important, although the fund itself will in particular focus even more on the adaptation side. And the session today, and I'm really excited about it, and you already told that we will indeed also inform the people about the criteria. We have a good presentation from our colleagues from SNV, Tigera, who explained what kind of criteria we are looking at. But also we have an example case, an Admiral case with Mr. Jaron Cohen, a project in Kenya what we already are involved in, and we already provide them with the finance solutions. And we have, of course, the expert panel, as mentioned by you. And it's exciting to see because it's really noticeable that we have now across the world many participants. I think more than 400 people registered already today, and not only from Kenya and the Netherlands, but many other countries. And in that perspective, I think it might be good to show a short video of what DFCD actually is, because DFCD, the Dutch Fund for Climate Development, is organizing, is initiating this. So maybe we could first show the video to this global audience.
Climate change is one of the biggest challenges we face today. It is already affecting people and nature across the globe, with developing countries being most impacted. There is an urgent need for investment to enable vulnerable communities and ecosystems to adapt to climate change. Yet funding is in short supply. The government of the Netherlands has committed to addressing this need by making 160 million euros available through the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development, known as the DFCD. Managed by a pioneering consortium of FMO, climate fund managers, SNV and WWF, the DFCD will work with the private sector to catalyse over 500 million euros in additional funding for bankable projects across the world. These projects will boost the health of fresh water, forest, agricultural and ocean ecosystems, and improve water management. Critically, the DFCD will help vulnerable communities to adapt, drive sustainable development, and strengthen global efforts to tackle climate change. The fund is ready to build new partnerships. So join us in our mission to create a more resilient future.
So the key issue DFCD tries to address is actually the project finance life cycle, as shown on the screen. What we see in the world is there are many projects that try to address all these climate issues. A lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of locally involved NGOs really establish good initiatives, but the issue is that sometimes they actually do not come to a certain stage of maturity. They really do not scale up. Not only sometimes, really often that's the case. And there are a couple of reasons for it. Maybe first of all, it's good to mention that there's a lot of cost involved in the early stage of a project. So you need to have a feasibility study, sometimes an environment and social impact assessment. And in order to finance that, you also need to have good contact with the financial institutions. But the financial institutions are often too much on a large distance of these local entrepreneurs and these NGOs. Actually, these two worlds are too much split from each other, too much separate. And secondly, actually, so the NGOs do not understand the financial institutions, and the other way around, this bank and this microfinance institutions do not really understand these specific projects. So with this DFCD, we have this consortium with a development bank and locally involved NGOs to address this issue. And not only this issue of working together, but also having grant funding available in the early stage with grants trying to develop projects, and also having a certain concessional element, a certain grant element also in the long-term finance structure, meaning actually that you can provide a long-term debt with an interest rate that is not reflecting the actual risk. And by having these two elements, the grant element and this consortium working all together, we try to address this project finance life cycle gap. And actually, in this whole journey, in this whole venture, we invite everybody to join us on this path and make scalable, financeable, successful projects out of it in the area of climate. That's actually what we try to do.
Yeah, but as you also said, so you explained a bit more about the DFCD, and it was funded actually 2 years ago. So why this challenge then now?
Yeah, why this challenge now? If you look, maybe we can show the map on the screen now. And what you see is within 2 years, also in the current COVID environment, I think we have been quite successful because we have now already done 18 projects around the globe. And we can do projects in all middle and low income countries. So the largest part of the world we could in principle cover. We have projects, for instance, on peatlands, restoration, conservation in Indonesia, but we also have projects in West Africa, like a sustainable seaweed farm near Namibia. We have forestry plantation, sustainable timber in Sierra Leone. We have with a microfinance institution in Bolivia, we work together on the farmers model to keep the farmers in the rural areas and provide them with the right inputs. So the mandate is quite globally. But at the same time, we all realize it was also in the Earth Day recently and in the leadership summit attached to it, the temperature has already risen with 1.3 degrees after the whole so-called industrial revolution. So actually, it is really, the momentum is there, but we need to speed up. So we have high ambitions with these funds, and we want to do more than what we have done now. And we want to do that in specific countries. Yeah.
And you say specific countries, as I mentioned in the beginning, we already had 2 events for Uganda, for Bangladesh, and today for Kenya. So I'm very curious to hear why Kenya, but also curious to hear why Uganda and Kenya as 2 of the 3 countries being so close to each other.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. Let's first start with the second part of your question, why these 2 countries, or maybe even if you include Bangladesh as well, although these 2 are linked to each other. So the world is a playing field, but at the same time we need to narrow it down to the most relevant countries. And we had 3 key criteria why we are choosing certain countries. First of all, we need a proper enabling environment, meaning actually that we think we can only do real business in countries that have, for instance, a good democracy, like in Kenya, where you have the multi-party system and elections next year. But we also need to have climate-relevant issues in the country. So there needs to be an issue regarding climate adaptation in particular, because adaptation is even more a focus for us than the mitigation part. And the last part of it is we try to work from a landscape perspective. WWF, our consortium partner, is extremely good in defining vulnerable critical landscapes, and we try to look at which landscapes are important enough to play a role on the climate space. So that's why we selected countries, and we came then on these 2 countries next to Bangladesh in Asia. On the first part of your question regarding Kenya in particular, now if we look at these 3 aspects, enabling environment, I already told about the good democracy in Kenya, but also there's quite some support from the government and also from the population. Research has shown that there's really support for climate-related investments in the country, in particular for adaptation, even more than in mitigation. And also what we see in Kenya is that there's a real entrepreneurial spirit. There are relatively many companies active in Kenya, what we also see from our experience as FMO, as development bank. So that put a lot of extra bonus points towards Kenya. If we look at the climate relevant aspect, we talked about adaptation. Similar thing, you see quite unpredictable weather patterns in Kenya. You can have at the same time in this same country a flood and a drought, impacting all the agricultural cycles in the country, which means that we need to invest, we need to do something to cope with the effects of climate change in Kenya. And also the locust plague, the outbreak, was also, on one hand, it already exists for 1,000 years, but on the other hand, the frequency and the size, the magnitude has substantially increased, and that's really due to climate change as well. So Kenya is very relevant, and the last part I mentioned is about landscapes. Kenya has a couple of extremely interesting, fantastic landscapes. One of them being a landscape in the southern part of Kenya, but also landscapes do not help themselves across borders. So it's also partly the northern part of Tanzania, the so-called Socknot landscape. And maybe it's good to show in the video what kind of landscape we talk about here.
The south of Kenya, north of Tanzania, also known as the Socknot landscape, is home to 3 major ecosystems: the Mau Mara Serengeti, Amboseli West Kilimanjaro, and Tsavo Mkomazi. All are connected by important wildlife migratory corridors. The landscape contributes €2.6 billion annually to the economies of Kenya and Tanzania through wildlife tourism, while providing an estimated 3 million jobs and more than €8 million in revenues. It also contains the main watershed and source of water for the population of Western Kenya. However, the landscape is vulnerable due to human encroachment and deforestation. Increasing pressure from a fast-growing population, expansion of agriculture, and the effects of climate change on natural resources threaten the landscape's ecosystem function and future sustainability. It also increases the vulnerability of both the wildlife and human populations, hence, urgent action is required to preserve it. By targeting this specific landscape, we seek to collectively contribute to the development of a diversified economy by having a coordinated approach to agriculture, agroforestry, water management, and sustainable energy investments. A scalable climate solution could enhance the ecological value and individual activities within a landscape and improve the resilience, economic prospects, and livelihoods of the population.
Great. So thanks and welcome back with us. Thanks for the video. I think it shows a lot about the landscape model, and we actually have more speakers that are going to talk a bit more about the landscape of Kenya and the Socknot as you mentioned it. But maybe just going a little bit back on, we said that the DFCD is a collaboration between 4, under which it's also FMO. I'm also curious to hear that there has been a lot of funding also before DFCD. So what is the difference between how FMO did the funding before DFCD and how it is now funding it within the DFCD collaboration?
Yes, well, FMO is, as a development bank, very experienced in projects around the world that have a clear development impact, not only by creating jobs, for instance, but also climate-relevant projects. And we talked then largely about renewable energy. One of the successful pillars of FMO is investing as one of the first parties already in a scalable way on renewable energy. So not only hydropower project, but also solar projects as well as wind projects, even in certain areas biomass. That has been some 10, 15 years ago, FMO was really a pioneer there. But what we see now is that this market, in particular on the renewable energy space, has been developed substantially already, and commercial parties can just take their ticket size and do the project themselves. So the climate scope needs to be more broadened now. And via this DFCD, we try also to look at mitigation projects outside renewable energy, and again, the adaptation space. And that's a part that's not covered at all in the world. Private adaptation projects, there are no funds for it. There are no financial institutions that really provide finance solutions. It's mostly actually purely a government issue. So this is new for FMO, this is new for the world. But FMO is extremely eager to do this, these new highly risk leveraged project, because it's a higher risk than a renewable energy project currently. And in order to do that, it's very good that we also have the DFCD fund to take this extra risk appetite, because revenue flows are certainly less certain than from renewable energy projects.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, so there is actually quite some different, and we're also going to talk a bit more about the private actors engagement and the very unique side of this fund, actually. So we will come back to you. There will be also questions coming through Q&A, and we'll come back a bit more about more on this uniqueness and how we can actually use the private actors. But before we dive deeper into this, we want to move on also to our next speakers. Before I go to our next speaker, let me also introduce to you who all of our speakers next to us are that are going to join us online. So we'll have Elizabeth Carabine, senior climate expert at the Embassy of the Kingdom of the Netherlands in Kenya, but also responsible for Uganda. Ms. Carol Kadeyuki, she's the CEO of Kenya Private Sector Alliance, KEPSA, and she'll be actually talking a bit more about how can we make this private sector engagement and what is very relevant, what should we take into account. Then we have Ms. Nuru Mugambi, the Director of Public Affairs and Sustainable Finance Lead at Kenya Bankers Association, and also talking a bit more about how we can use the middle and small enterprises, how can we really attract them also within this fund. Then, of course, we want to learn a bit more about the landscape model as we discussed, but also more examples from model projects that we have. One is from Mr. Yaron Cohen, manager at Project Madaraka, Amir in Kenya, and he'll be talking and taking us through his project, what they're running out now, and what we can learn from that project. Then our final speaker, Tigere Muzenda, the Regional Investment Officer and Business Developer for Africa for the DFCD. And he will talk a bit more about the challenge, how can you apply, what can we do, and anything else you need to know more if you have any considerations. But let's first move on to our next speaker, Elizabeth Carabine, the Senior Climate Expert at the Embassy. And she'll be talking a bit more about also the role of the Embassy, and she's with us through Zoom. Welcome, Elizabeth. Nice to have you again with us and join us. The floor is yours. Take us through what you want to tell us and all of our viewers joining us globally.
Hi, Melody. Thanks very much, and good morning, everyone. As Melody said, I'm Liz, and I'm covering the region, which is Africa region, as the climate advisor, and that is fortunately for me covering Uganda and Kenya. So I'm very excited and happy to see these launches of this challenge. And so on behalf of the Embassy of the Kingdom of the Netherlands in Kenya, welcome to this launch of the DFCD Scalable Climate Solutions Challenge in Kenya. And we're very grateful to our partners at FMO, SMV, WWF, and climate fund managers for devising this challenge, the work they're doing so far, and really look forward to hearing about it more. Convening this meeting with, you say 400 people, that's amazing. I'm here in Nairobi. I'm sure we're having people from all over the world. And to all of you for joining us, it's a great opportunity. And for us, it's a very happy day for me and our team. Many years of careful design, thinking about this fund, what were the problems that needed to be addressed, that we've just heard about, and how exactly to design it to be most effective, and the selection of the excellent partners that we have to manage the fund, and the inception work that's been going on for 2 years. We're really excited at the Embassy to see the climate finance commitments Netherlands have made, reaching the countries and communities that are most vulnerable and need it the most. Kenya, as you say, experiences a lot of climate hazards, and increasingly feels the effects of climate change on the economy, on livelihoods, on the environment, on even infrastructure and assets, and people across Kenya. But Kenya's made a lot of progress. You mentioned the enabling environment, and we completely agree. A lot of progress in planning and implementation of both adaptation and mitigation action through public and private sector investment. Kenya have just recently, a few months ago, submitted their revised nationally determined contribution, which is the document that outlines the country's climate ambition. And the Netherlands Embassy, together with partners, including the UK and others, are really proud to support the government to implement this in the coming year and beyond. In our bilateral cooperation, the Netherlands is really trying to take an integrated approach to food security, agricultural development and trade, water resource management, water and sanitation, the circular economy, and access to renewable energy, all the topics you've mentioned and touched upon that are so important and climate relevant in Kenya. And through all of this activity, private sector development is really a thread through all of the development cooperation. Around 40% of existing climate finance in Kenya is invested by the domestic and international private sectors. But as we've already heard, this is almost entirely in renewable energy and mitigation. And there's really an urgent need to address Kenya's other priority sectors of water, agriculture, and environment. And this is really where we believe that the DFCD is going to fill a really important gap in the sectors, but also in scaling solutions that we know are there, that we'll hear some more about today, that already exist, and increasing private investment that's crucial for the green and climate resilient growth across the whole economy, across all sectors. So just to say, we welcome our partners online and in Kenya, and with the fund managers to join this discussion. Please share your best examples. Please rise to the challenge and apply, and help us to maximize our impact in financing solutions at scale through this challenge and beyond with the DFCD and other instruments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Yeah, thanks for touching a bit on the regional context as well. And yeah, actually kind of also confirming what you were saying, Art, that 40% of everything is also in private sector, but the concern here is that it has been more over in mitigation and renewable energy. And that's why it's so important that we, with the DFCD, focus on all the other aspects. But I'm also curious to hear you from the Embassy, Elizabeth. What is the role of the Embassy with the DFCD or with the challenge now in Kenya?
Like I say, we're excited to see it reaching us at the country level and embassy level. And our role is really, we're of course very close with our partners at FMOS and WWF Climate Fund Managers already and other initiatives and investments. So our role is really to continue being the brokering partners, the providing advice where requested or where we see it. And also really to learn. You've mentioned the learning. There's 18 projects so far. There's going to be more. There'll be more in Kenya. And really for us to learn what's working, what's not in terms of scaling, also in adaptation, mitigation, action and projects in these sectors specifically, and how that should inform our own policy and programs in Kenya, which is something that we look at now in the coming year. What's the strategy for the coming 4 years? So it's very much a partnership. As I said, we have a focus in the Embassy always on private sector development, economic development, innovation, knowledge and skills. As such, we have very valued partnership with KEPSA and others that we'll hear today. Also in Dutch knowledge institutes, Kenyan knowledge institutes, businesses. So we have this network, and in our own development cooperation and those of our close partners in the EU and other countries. So we hope that we would be able to connect dots and be part of this learning process and rollout, so that we get to maximize all the efforts that are ongoing in climate action and finance in Kenya, which are several. So thank you.
Great, thank you. And well, Art is with me at the table, and I think you want to also mention something on this part of the role.
I think the role of the embassy is really important. Also, as a networking feet on the ground, for instance, as mentioned, Elizabeth, the NDCs, the nationally determined contribution of the country. We always, on one hand, we do private projects. I think we try to explain that, but on the other hand, it needs to be linked towards the plans of the government. And the embassy has really good contact with all the institutions mentioned by Elizabeth, but also with the governmental parts of all these organizations. And by having these linked together, we can make it fit into the national development plans of the government. So that's for us also quite crucial, actually, to have the embassy there locally present.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you both, and you'll be still with us during our panel discussion, so we'll be asking more questions. But it's actually also a good bridge to our next speaker, because as Art and Elizabeth both mentioned, it's very important to tap into the national agendas of the government as well if you want it to be taken ownership and that we come to sustainable solutions. So our next speaker, Ms. Carol Kariuki, she's the CEO of Kenya Private Sector Alliance, KEPSA. She'll be talking a bit more about KEPSA and taking us through what we need to know more about the private sector, but also the role that they play in brokering actually between government and private sector. So we can learn a bit more about how we can do that. And as the CEO of KEPSA, she can talk a bit more about what they now do, what has been successful in attracting the private sector. We can maybe learn a little bit more also about how we see the role of the government in that. Maybe while we wait for that, Art, if I can also ask you, you did say that you want to tap into the national agenda of the governments as well. But I'm also wondering, because this is working with private actors, but you are looking for scalable solutions. So and somehow you also want it to continue when the DFCD funding stops. So what role do you see for governments there?
And the government is extremely important for us that they create the right enabling environment. So our projects need to fit in an environment that is good for the country. So we need to, if we work on a protocol together, I think it needs to be in coordination with the government, in particular because we talk about crucial landscapes. We try to work specifically in crucial landscapes that need to be resilient against climate change. You can't do that without the government. It's quite simple. So the interaction between the government, the understanding of these national development plans are very important for us. And so that's the main angle. In that perspective, we try to strive for private projects, but if the government angle can be increased, if the government wants to play a role, even want to be a shareholder or any other way of participation, we would welcome them very much.
Can really continue afterwards.
Yeah, maybe the idea was really a public-private project instead of only purely private.
Yeah. Well, actually, let's then dive a bit deeper into that. Carol Kariuki, I think you're now with us. And yeah, take us through what is KEPSA, of course, but also how you see the role of the government, of the private sectors. And yeah, we're very curious to hear your story.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. On behalf of the private sector, Kenya Private Sector Alliance, let me take this opportunity to welcome you to our conversation and thank the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development, DFCD, for choosing Kenya to participate in the Scalable Climate Solutions Challenge. Today's event provides a great opportunity to discuss the climate challenges we face as a country, the private sector participation in adaptation and mitigation efforts, and the potential DFCD support in scaling bankable climate projects. As the apex body of the private sector in Kenya, KEPSA brings together business associations, professional organizations, trade associations, corporates, multinational companies, SMEs, and startups from all sectors of the economy under one umbrella to enable them to speak with one voice when engaging government and other stakeholders on cross-cutting policy issues affecting private sector development, supporting businesses on training, opportunities to network for business, financial linkages, mentoring, access to markets, value chains, and access to investment opportunities. KEPSA has been in the forefront in championing sustainable and inclusive business practices and efforts towards climate change mitigation and adaptation. These efforts are coordinated through a dedicated environment, water, and natural resources sector board that works closely with the government through the Ministry of Environment and Forestry, as well as the National Treasury and Planning. We encourage the private sector to participate in the challenge of the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development, DFCD, Scalable Climate Solutions Challenge, which is keen on business models that provide climate resilience and large-scale impact in Kenya. The challenge provides the winner an opportunity to receive a development contribution of up to 350,000 euros and get a chance to present their project at the COP26 in Glasgow and become eligible for larger support from DFCD. The Environment Sector Board of KEPSA was instrumental in championing the development of the Climate Change Act in 2016, the National Climate Change Action Plan 2018 to 2022, and the ongoing development of climate change regulations that provides incentives for businesses implementing climate change initiatives. To effectively coordinate private sector participation in climate change mitigation and adaptation, KEPSA is in the process of developing a private sector strategy for the implementation of climate change solutions. We have successfully integrated green business environment reforms in our advocacy blueprint. This is the third national business agenda, which is what guides us every 5 years in how we are going to engage our government and the stakeholders in the different areas, and are championing initiatives such as the extended producer responsibility on PET bottles, awareness, creation on climate change through the Climate Business Innovation Network, as well as supporting businesses' transition to more sustainable models through the Sustainable Inclusive Business Project, the Knowledge Center under the KEPSA Foundation, which is really, really supported by the Dutch government, and we are very, very grateful. KEPSA sits in the SDGs Interagency Technical Committee at the National Treasury and Planning, which is responsible for the coordination of implementation and reporting of progress of Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs in Kenya. Therefore, we coordinate reporting of private sector contributions towards SDGs to complement Kenya's national voluntary review. This includes contributions to sustainable consumption and production, climate change, climate action, life on land and below water, goals 12 to 15, where we have seen numerous innovations and deliberate efforts by businesses to improve resource efficiency, reduce carbon footprint, e.g. by switching to clean energy, reduction and recycling of waste, among others. These efforts can be accelerated through enabling policy frameworks, capacity building, and access to green climate financing. In collaboration with KEPSA with government, the government is also developing a framework to accelerate business transition to green and circular economy, and a green physical incentives framework policy to provide guidance on the provision of green incentives to be accorded to business that adopts more environmentally friendly and sustainable models. KEPSA co-chairs the Partnering for Green Growth and Global Goals, P4G, national platform with Kenya National Treasury, and has catalyzed 15 partnerships, both startup and scale up, to provide market-based solutions for sustainable development goals. This includes the new plastics economy in Kenya, spearheaded by KEPSA, and Center for Clean Air Policy, sustainable SEZs, such as the planned Oserian Two Lakes Industrial Park in Naivasha, as part of the Scaling Sustainable Industrial Cluster programs, among others. These are initiatives we could borrow lessons for upscaling. With those few remarks, we welcome the support by DFCD and look forward to working together to identify scalable climate solutions in the country, as well as empowering the private sector to build capacity and increase investments in climate change mitigation. Thank you.
Thank you, Kariuki. Thanks for the insight in KEPSA, and it's also really nice to have actually through you so many members also with us that we can learn from. We'll be going more into the panel discussion also to learn more about KEPSA, but more best practice that you can share. But before we moved on to you, we were already diving in also a little bit on the role of the government. Art touched upon how he sees the role of the government, but I'm curious to hear from you, as you must have a lot of expertise on that now, is what do you think the role of the government should be in terms of finding actually sustainable solutions, specifically for Kenya now?
Okay, thank you. The role of government and the way we work with government is to make sure that we have the right policies and laws in place, but also the regulations, because it's one thing to have the policies, but if you don't have the regulations and then the information of where business needs to go into business, to be able to get the information they need and the flow of how investments should happen. So as long as there's information, there's laws and policies, right? And then the regulators are doing their job, then that is where we see the role of government.
Okay, thank you, Kariuki. We'll come back to you. As I said, we will also have more panel discussions. So again, if you have questions for her or for any of the speakers we had so far, put them in the Q&A box. But without further ado, let's also move to our next speaker. We have Ms. Nuru Mugambi with us, Director of Public Affairs and Sustainable Finance Lead at Kenya Bankers Association. So very curious to learn also more about the local climate challenges that we actually see in Kenya. We already talked about the landscape model. We'll learn a bit more about what is happening in Kenya, what kind of climate challenges we should focus on. But she can also talk a bit more about the local challenges that we have so far. And we can touch up a bit more on how she sees that the DFCD should be accessible to different kind of middle or small enterprises. Welcome, Nuru Mugambi. Thanks for being with us. And I see also the logo behind you, so it can at all times show that you're working at the Kenya Bankers. Yeah, take it away. Take us through your presentation.
Thank you so much, Melody. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me share my screen. Melody, I hope you could see my slides. Great. So let me start the conversation by just framing it in the COVID context. From a banking perspective in Kenya, banks lead in terms of the percentage of assets that are within the financial sector. And within the COVID environment, we are seeing increased optimism. Most recently, we've come from a period of really having some low optimism, particularly during the months of May and June, but that is coming back as we're seeing government interventions, and Art and also Carol talked about the importance of government from a signaling perspective, but also from an intervention perspective. So we're seeing more optimism within the banking industry. Banks have restructured 54% of their entire portfolios, which is quite a large percentage. I always give the example of imagine in a kiosk, if a kiosk owner gives half of their merchandise and supply for free, or allows half of one in every two customers to go away with their product without having to repay. That's effectively what the banking industry has been doing by restructuring a number of these loans, suspending loan repayments, really just to support the economy during this COVID environment, with a focus on three key sectors: trade, agriculture, and manufacturing. And of course, this space of DFCD touches on those three areas. So coming closer to climate finance, I just want to talk about why this fund is so important, particularly if the fund will be looking at those counties that we typically probably don't focus on. When you look at Kenya's economic structure, all of our economies, all the counties are underpinned by agriculture and manufacturing. And of course, those are two key areas that are impacted on by climate issues. These are some of the statistics that we have seen from the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics that did a fantastic job in really just kind of breaking down the economic structure of the country from a county perspective. And what we found was that 3 counties out of our 47 counties in Kenya contribute to basically the growth. So we're talking about several counties, 40 plus counties that need to be supported. And remember the fact that each and every of those counties have agriculture, manufacturing underpinning growth. Therefore, it's really important to look at ways of de-risking these economies through climate finance. And that's where DFCD comes in. The national government through National Treasury, supported by GNI Plus, Kenya Climate Innovation Center, the Climate Policy Initiative and Kenya Private Sector Alliance did a commendable job last year conducting a demand and supply side study on climate finance, really just trying to understand where is the climate finance flow going and where is it coming from. And what we found was that the public sector is really doing a commendable job, not only sending the right signals, but really investing in climate aligned investments, followed by international investors. However, we are seeing an increase in local market participation. And I think this is where organizations like KEPSA can come in to really look at how do we incentivize more of this local capital flow. Within the local capital markets, we find that banks are leading in terms of the amount of climate finance that is coming through. About 80% of all local climate finance is coming through banks. And then a further 19.4% is coming from local enterprises, either through venture capital, direct investment, their own capital retained earnings. So really, I think the landscape of climate finance in Kenya is a promising landscape. It's a story of collaboration, both public and private sector. But there is a need for a more diversification of how the climate finance is flowing. We're seeing a lot of focus on energy sector. There are sectors like water, transportation, food, tourism, especially, which is being impacted by COVID, that need those financial flows. And again, that's where funds like DFCD play a key role. Through the Kenya Green Bond Program that was also supported by WWF and several partners, we see and we can actually quantify how big the ecosystem is, how big the demand is for green finance, particularly in transport, agri, and manufacturing. And I can't emphasize those enough. We have spent a lot of time looking at the energy sector, but there are those other sectors that underpin local market growth that really need to be looked at. In the next 5 to 10 years, there is a demand of about 60 billion Kenya shillings within transportation, 18.2 billion shillings within agriculture, and about 10.3 billion in manufacturing. That's within the next 5 to 10 years. So hopefully the participants in this fund will be within some of these sectors. They'll be supported not only from a pre-feasibility perspective, but really just scaling up some of their work, and that way crowding in other financiers so that their work can really be boosted. And that's where the role of blended finance comes in. We see that from a growth of private sector credit perspective, the market is still depressed because of this issue around risk. And just to give you a perspective, what I'm displaying here on the screen is that in 2014, the rate of private sector credit growth was at about 25%. When the interest rate caps were introduced in 2016, we started seeing the effects of that in really seeing private sector lending shifting from private sector to the government. And this speaks to two issues around the risk-free rate and issues around really market risk. When the rate cap and the market was liberalized again in 2019, we did see private sector lending increasing again up until, of course, now with this COVID environment that we're in. However, we have not reached the previous levels that we had seen in the past. So in terms of, just looking at my time, in terms of what this means, we really need to support the local market, especially banks and other financiers, microfinance institutions and SACCOs, to build their capacity to understand the risk within the ESG space. Manufacturing, agri, transportation, and tourism, really just understanding those environmental risks so that they can really adjust their risk policies and processes. However, there is a positive story. KBA, the Kenya Bankers Association, conducted a study to really look at, are banks really spending more time and really thinking about this issue of climate finance more strategically around ESGs and around the SDGs. And what we were very happy to find is 81% of the banks that we spoke to actually have a purposeful approach in terms of looking at climate change and making sure that they abide by those climate change laws and regulations, again, and following the policy signal. 57.1% of the banks we spoke to have a sustainability structure, a sustainability reporting process that they're looking at. And more importantly, 52.4% of them said that they are looking at environmental, social, and environmental impact. Economic, environmental, and social impact at the board level. So that means at the board level, the leadership within the industry is beginning to be more aligned with the public sector interest. Art really talked about the structure of the fund, which to me is a blended finance fund that helps demonstrate why we need to have these types of de-risking elements to crowd in more financial sector participants. So really, in summary, I want to talk about 4 key takeaways. One is that there is a key role that the policymaker needs to play in helping to enhance liquidity. I talked about what we're seeing in private sector lending and the trends around that. Number 2, in terms of playing a crowding in effect, really addressing issues around the risk-free rate and making sure that the private sector lenders are incentivized to lend to private sector versus lending to government. The other area policymakers can play a key role is really signaling to make sure that the sector priorities are looked at. We'll spend a lot of time on energy. Let's start looking at other sectors and also the geographic distribution. Remember, I showed you that only 3 counties out of 47 counties are really driving and underpinning growth of Kenya, and that's not a sustainable economic sector structure. And finally, policymakers need to look at incentives. Kenya, I think, was one of the first countries in Africa to introduce a tax incentive around green bonds. We need to see more of those tax policy initiatives. The second area is market building through capacity, really looking at helping. Art talked about the gap between supply and demand, speaking 2 different languages. So we really need to look at that. The third key takeaway is the opportunity for donors and DFIs, really to come in and help from a tracking and reporting perspective. A lot of DFIs are in this market, not only in Kenya, but across East Africa, lending to financial institutions. We need to use those frameworks to start really tracking the climate finance story and really understanding the breakdown from adaptation and mitigation perspective. And then finally, as I conclude, there is a great opportunity for de-risking, really looking at those key sectors, particularly in this COVID environment. So programs like blended finance, credit guarantee schemes are really welcomed and encouraged. Thank you.
Thank you, Nuru Mugambi. That was a very comprehensive presentation about how what has happened actually in Kenya, but also the impact of COVID, which I think is also interesting to show what happened. And yeah, you emphasize a lot on your call that we really need to look at this domestic capital flow and that we need to make sure that there is more funding going there, but also to the specific teams that are now underfunded. So you already touched upon that, but I'm curious to hear if you want more fundees or actually potential applies on specific teams that are currently underfunded and it's the fully domestic. Does that mean that they are not a bit maybe too small for the fund, or how do you see that?
I'm not sure I understand your question. Could you rephrase it?
Yeah, so if you, I'm wondering if you have, if you're working, for example, in renewable energy, then probably you are quite a big organization or company working on that. You have a lot of knowledge already. How do you see the fact that we are with the DFCD or with this challenge also looking to come to sustainable solutions? There should be the required revenue is around 6 million. I might also come to you, Art, to ask this question. But if you're saying that we want to impulse the domestic flow on these specific teams, are the organizations currently big enough to work in that field?
Okay, so I think the key point that I'm raising is the fact that we need to diversify where a lot of this climate finance is going. You talk about the energy sector. Energy sector, it's really quite broad. You have the big projects like the Turkana wind farm, for example, but you also have the startup space. They're great examples of pay-as-you-go energy frameworks. Also within the water system, Upepo is a good example of a startup. I think they only have about 10, 15 employees. It's a smaller organization. They've been funded through from a proof of concept perspective, and then now they're really looking at growing up from a commercialization perspective. So really the energy sector is also quite broad. The spectrum is wide, and that's the same case for all the other sectors. I think that's the beauty of Kenya. You have like a broad spectrum, and I think Art talked about why Kenya was selected. For example, you do have multiple players right across creating value. So I think the fund will attract a good diversity. I wouldn't say there is this issue of too small. I think we do hear a lot of times, a lot of these funds look for the bigger enterprises and say that small enterprises are too small because of the cost of mobilization. But hopefully the fund will look at the full spectrum.
Then Art, can you actually answer to that?
Yeah, maybe I think that that's a very relevant thing indeed. Of course, we strive always to have private parties on board, and that can sometimes be relatively medium or larger companies. But we really start at the medium segment. So, total assets of 6 million or revenue 6 million is actually normally a medium-sized company. But at the same time, our ambitions are really very much linked to what Ms. Noura also said regarding, if you look at Kenya, there you have maybe 4 countries that attribute to the large part of the economic growth. So we really try to find also solutions to the more less developed areas, also with the smaller companies. And we can do that in 3 ways. Either we attach ourselves towards a microfinance institution where we can reach the smallholder segment, the very small farmers. Or we can work with companies like, for instance, the processing companies who will have then outreach towards this same relatively smaller agricultural businesses. Or we link ourselves to cooperatives, which is a combination of all these farmers. So there are a couple of ways where we really, the ultimate target group will still be also the smaller segment there, Melody.
Yeah. And I'll actually later on, maybe in a panel, it's also interesting to talk a bit more about this. Maybe one final thing before we move to the next speaker. Noura, you mentioned actually startups and how they are seen specifically in light to DFCD. Maybe you can also quickly talk about that.
Yeah, what we treat, so we need it's a scalable climate solutions. What you see often with startups is that it's tiny, very small. So often we try at least to attach to an organization that has already a certain track record, but can still be innovative. If it's really a startup that just started, then either we try to find a way to combine it with the methodology we just said, with, for instance, microfinance institutions, or other kind of cooperatives or larger entities. Or if the story is so convincing and they have also multiple partners to work with that it can be scaled up in a couple of years, then we could also look really at the real startup segment. But that will in practice often be an exception.
Yeah. But there's different ways of looking at it and how to make it eligible. Yeah. Thank you both. And yeah, I'm sure there's more questions. Of course, I also want to later on ask what other speakers think of all the takeaways that you give us and how we reflect on that. But let's first move to our next speaker, Yaron Cohen. And because now we can actually dive in a little bit more on Kenya, a specific project in Kenya. How is it? What does that project do? What can we learn from that project? And Yaron Cohen, you're with us, and you're going to take us through the project Madaraka. And yeah, take it away. We're very curious to hear how the project has been. I know you just started, but whatever you can tell us and our viewers to learn a bit more about this project.
Sure. Thank you, Melody. Yeah, so I'm the manager of a new initiative at Amaran called Project Madaraka. I'm going to run you through the DFCD project that we're currently engaging with the organization on, as well as explain a little bit about how the project and Amaran's core business combine to deliver increased climate resilience for farmers. So first of all, just a bit of background about Amaran. It's a long-standing distributor of agricultural equipment and inputs. It's been a major player in the growth of the agribusiness industry, and more recently has introduced solutions tailored to smallholders, including the Amaran Farmers Kit, which is shown in the example in the picture behind me. The concept of the company is not just to bring in the products, but also to layer the equipment and input solutions with substantial local agronomic support from the team, so that the farmers are getting complete solutions to meet their agronomic needs, and the company serves as a one-stop shop for the farmer. Madaraka is Amaran's initiative to integrate a credit product into that solution, to make these many of these products have a significant climate change impact, to make these products more affordable and accessible to farmers in Kenya. So before I go into more of the detail and the structure of what we're doing, I'd like to just show a short video this is Gideon's story that gives an example of how it works.
Jina langu ni Gideon Geshimo. Hapa tuko kwa shamba langu laitwa Ambadnas Farm. Tuko pahali panaitwa Muyogo, Mwega, Nyeri County, na mimi ni mkulima wa vitunguu, na hii ndio kazi mimi hufanya, na tunafanya hii kazi pamoja na watu wa Amiran. Tangu tuanze hii safari nao, nimeona mabadiliko makubwa sana. Vitunguu kama hivi hatukuwahi vipata hapo awali, ambapo tulikuwa tunaweza kulima bila hizi bidhaa za Amiran. Wataalamu wa Amiran walipokuja shambani, waliweza kunipatia solution ya kupea mimea yangu maji through drip irrigation, na hapo wakanielezea kwamba wako na credit facility ambayo unalipa a down payment, alafu kila mwezi unalipa a very small amount ambayo haikustrain kama mkulima. Na vile wametailor hiyo product yao, wameilinganisha na pale ambapo unatoa mimea kwa shamba. Kwa hivyo baada ya miezi kama 6 unalipa a bit of a lump sum, lakini bado si lump sum ambayo ina kustrain. Hii drip irrigation tumeona ya kwamba kuna tofauti kubwa sana. Pale ambapo tulikuwa tunatumia raining hose, tulikuwa tunakuta ya kwamba kuna wastage mingi ya maji. Pia juu yale maji yanapewa kutoka juu, tulikuwa tunapata ya kwamba tulikuwa tunatumia a lot of fungicides juu ya fungal diseases. Na pia uniformity. Ukiangalia hivi vitunguu vyote viko uniform, na pia vyote vina bulb at the same time.
So I'll just add on to that, the longer version of that video also includes the support that our agronomist provided to the farmer, visiting the farm and introducing more advanced inputs to combine with the irrigation product that was sold on credit, including slow release fertilizers. So to the more kind of conceptual level of what we're doing and how it works, and how it is focused on the climate change challenge that farmers are facing. So the product solutions that Amiran offer farmers really have a focus essentially on 2 big climate change adaptation themes. That's the impact of pests and extreme weather, and also problems with water scarcity. So the Amiran irrigation solutions and water storage solutions help to buffer the farmer and manage the water that they have available more effectively. It can also serve as a medium for the delivery, a more efficient delivery of inputs to the crop. And then the greenhouse solution allows the farmer to control the environment and protect the crop from adverse weather, especially crops that are more sensitive to weather extremes. And then the range of inputs include crop protection solutions and seeds that are more resilient to climate change effects. So these 2 boxes on the middle and the left are to the Amiran offer, and then what Project Madaraka brings to the table is to the very unique risks of farming, the kind of structuring of climate finance into supporting the farmer to meet their objectives and make these products affordable. So the payment plan, as Gideon mentioned in the video, is structured around the harvest pattern and the cash flow of the products that are sold. And the credit process is integrated into the sales process of Amiran's technical team, so that the farmer has a kind of efficient and, again, one-stop shop solution to meet both their credit and their product needs. And then we're also, as part of the focus of this DFCD project, looking to broaden and deepen the climate-related aspects of our credit process and the risk assessment and monitoring, and explore how we might bundle insurance to increase the farmers' resilience. So to sum up the DFCD project, we, alongside working together to broaden the climate risk framework and the integration of insurance, one of the primary objectives is to spin out Project Madaraka into a standalone company that manages a vehicle or a blended finance vehicle that would attract both domestic and international investors with appetite to take risk to these farmers, and serve as a manager of that vehicle and the operation of the credit process in partnership with Amaran's sales team. As that happens, Madaraka will be serving Amaran effectively as its first client, and obviously the customers of Amaran being the beneficiaries of the credit solution. And in the medium term, the objectives to then replicate the model across the Amaran's sister companies in Africa, as well as add other distributors of climate smart products to the whole program. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Jaron Cohen. And I'm sure there's also more questions coming in later on. And I would also like to ask other speakers to ask you questions about your project. But maybe first, the farmers that you work with, how many of these farmers do you actually work with in this project?
Yeah, so we've been piloting since 2019 internally within the company. We've worked with around 100 farmers so far. And really just been testing out the concept across a range of different products, including some new products as well as the existing products within the Amaran stable. Yeah,
and when moving forward, well, you were discussing that you would like to also scale up, of course, and you want to expand it. How do you think the DFCD can affect that moving forward from
here? So, absolutely, yeah. I think we're hoping that there'll be a key partner along the journey as we transition from a more heavily concessionally finance funded model where we're testing out the model and how the product would work, and transition into more commercial investment from institutions, both domestic and international. So, the role of DFCD in the project to bridge that gap, intermediate, ensure FMO is on board with what we're doing, and is an anchor partner, as well as other investors, is going to be crucial to our success.
Yeah, thank you. We'll be coming back to you when we move to the panel discussion, but now moving on to our final speaker actually of today before we move to the panel discussion later on, Tigera Muzenda. He's the Regional Investment Officer, as I said, but also the Business Developer for Africa with the DFCD, and he'll be taking us through what the challenge is, the challenge that we set up and that we're talking during this event, how you can apply, what the conditions are, and yeah, telling a bit more practicalities of the challenge as well. Tigera, welcome. You're with us on Zoom.
Thank you very much, Melody, and welcome to our guests. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be. My name is Tigera Muzenda. I'm the Regional Investment Officer for Dutch Fund for Climate and Development. I'm based in Nairobi, in Kenya, and I cover Sub-Saharan Africa through my colleagues that I work with in various SNV offices around the subcontinent. So I will be talking to you about the challenge, Scalable Climate Solutions Challenge, and how you can apply, how you can benefit if you participate. I will be sharing my screen just now, just a minute. Yeah, it's coming up.
I actually heard that we have over 200 viewers, 220 viewers with us at this moment. So thanks for being still with us. I hope you keep dropping your questions. And also now that we move to the practical part on how you can apply to the challenge, if anything is not clear, interact with us, please, because we have everyone here to answer those questions for you. Tigero, we can see your presentation. If you can put the slideshow on, then we can see everything full on mode.
Okay. Right. So this is the subject that we're going to be talking about. I'm sure you can see the screen now, the presentation. So this is the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development. And I think as we have heard from the earlier presenters and also from the video, we are talking about a landscape in which we are going to be intervening. We have already started that work. And I'm going to be telling you about the work we've done, but also how you can qualify and become eligible and also apply to participate in the challenge. The DFCD uses what we call the landscape approach, wherein we look at a country in which we want to intervene, look at the most climate change vulnerable areas in that country. And we work together with the private sector and also partly with the public sector on the policy side and regulatory side to see how best we can intervene in this landscape. So that we can benefit the businesses and the communities in this landscape. These areas being climate change vulnerable. In Kenya, for instance, we've chosen an area that we've defined together with Worldwide Fund for Nature, our partners in the consortium, the area that we call SOCNOD, south of Kenya, north of Tanzania. This is an area that straddles the border between Tanzania and Kenya, and it goes all the way from part of the western side down to the coast, closer to the Indian Ocean. And this area covers, for instance, Serengeti, Western Kilimanjaro on the Tanzanian side, as well as Mkomazi on the Tanzanian side. But also on the Kenyan side, we have the Masai Mara down from Narok to Kajiado, Amboseli, going down to Tsavo. And this is the area that we've defined, but we also include therein the water towers, which are really critical to Kenya. Since most of the rivers that we have in the country flow around the country from and emanate from the water towers of Mau, the Mau complex, and also Mount Kenya and Aberdares. These are the areas that we cover in the SOCNOD landscape that we've chosen to intervene in. Why is this important, and why scalable climate solutions? Before I get on to that, we've heard how important, even from Noor's presentation, as well as from the video, how important these landscapes are, but also to what extent does each county contribute to economic activity, to GDP, contribution to the gross domestic product for Kenya. In this respect, we find that there's quite a disparity among counties because of where they lie and also how they're affected by climate. And hence, in our climate and climate adaptation, as well as our focus on landscape, we have chosen this area because in one side, it is agriculture that is affected. It is forestry, energy, as well as water resources that are affected. So how best can we work with companies in these areas to make sure that we bring the benefits, the adaptation, the resilience and sustainability that they need to continue to do business? Having chosen that, we then say, what is it that a company needs to be like? What is its profile? How does it qualify? In this case, we're looking at broadly, what is the profile of this company that qualifies for the challenge, but also generally qualifies for the DFCD assistance? So the company should be one that helps to strengthen the resilience of the business in which it operates, which means the project that it wants to undertake has got that element of building resilience, and also in the communities within which it operates, that is mostly the SOCNOD, the Mau, the Mount Kenya and Aberdares, as well as the water towers going down, which brings the rivers down country. The project should establish synergies with other initiatives in the region, possibly working with together with SNV, the development organization, with Worldwide Fund for Nature, and many other development partners that we have in Kenya. The project should align with Kenya's intended nationally determined contributions. We know Kenya signed up to the Paris Agreement on climate, and it is also following attainment of quite a number of sustainable development goals. So the project that we're going to be looking at should be one that helps to promote the meeting of these nationally determined contributions on climate change, as well as attainment of several sustainable development goals. We'll look at some of these as we go. And lastly, on a broad level, the project should also benefit vulnerable groups. As we have seen in the SOCNOT landscape, these are areas, some of which are arid and some of which are semi-arid. So there are issues of shortage of water, unpredictable rainfall patterns, and also there's human-animal conflict, because this area also has got quite a number of conservancies. So how best can we work with companies, for instance, and communities in tourism, as well as in conservation, to help minimize this human-animal conflict? We look at the criteria that makes an entity eligible for support from the DFCD under this Scalable Climate Solutions Challenge. Firstly, the idea is to be able to support companies that have potential for viability. These may be greenfield companies, this may be brownfield companies, that is, companies existing and seeking to expand or to scale their operations. They should be potentially commercially viable. The reason why we are looking at this is we want to win companies off donor money, which means they need to, at some point, to be able to support themselves, support their operations, and even grow beyond borders on their own financial strength without relying on donor money. Because as we have seen with changes in donor assistance with COVID, there are some priorities that come and become very important. And maybe there's now a scale down on support that goes to entities, companies in the private sector. So a company needs to win off donor money. We also look at how best does this company support climate change using markers or metrics that we call the real marker. Broadly, we are looking at, does this company promote biodiversity? Does this company help to avoid deforestation? And does it strongly support or has an inclination strongly in climate change adaptation to build resilience and sustainability in its operations and in the communities? And we've got metrics that we look at on supporting mostly climate change adaptation and to a certain extent, climate change mitigation. Thirdly, the company needs to be in an eligible country. And here we are looking at Kenya. It's one of the eligible countries. It's a Dutch priority country. But we also look at other countries outside Kenya, of course, where this challenge is being run. That is in Uganda and Bangladesh. So in this case today, the company needs to be one that is located in Kenya or will have its operations in Kenya for it to be eligible to apply to the challenge. We also are strongly inclined towards supporting national ownership. The company that will be eligible for the Scalable Climate Solutions Challenge should be nationally owned and should also be aligned with national priorities, national goals, especially on climate change. As we all know, Kenya as a government, as a country, is signed to the Paris Agreement on climate change and has actually in place policies and an act on climate change, policies and strategies that support climate change adaptation. Vulnerable groups, as we have indicated earlier, we need this company that is going to be eligible to apply for the challenge to be one that has objectives to support the marginalized at the bottom of the pyramid, the poor, the disabled, and also children and the youth, of course, not forgetting gender sensitivity. These are aspects that will make an applicant eligible for application. Furthermore, we go on. Some activities are not generally supported under the DFCD and under the challenge. And as per the consortium's mandate, we would not support activities that promote deforestation, that promote the use of fossil fuels or nuclear energy. These, we know how much impact they've had on climate change. Just in Kenya alone, when you talk about the Mau complex and encroachment, human encroachment, as well as negative agricultural activities that have impacted on the Mau complex and hence on the rainfall pattern in Kenya, this is important. Hence, we exclude some of these activities and they will not be supported under the Scalable Solutions, Scalable Climate Solutions. Then the size of the organization, it has also been indicated earlier by Art. that we need to have a company that once we support it, it has got capacity to carry the debt that it will be obtaining from FMO. It is also a company that has got assets or a turnover of 6 million euro or more. But again, as indicated earlier in the discussion by Ad, we are not saying we won't support smallholder farmers because they don't have 6 million euro as turnover or assets. There are models that we can use, various financing models, the hub and spoke models, the outgrower schemes that we can use, for instance, where we have aggregators, maybe on the supply side, aggregators as off-takers that we can use as financing mechanism to support those at the bottom of the pyramid and those that may not individually qualify to obtain direct support. So we'd use those models to reach out to those that we need to.
Sorry, Tigera, just asking you to wrap it up a little bit so that we have enough time for the panel discussion as well. I know you have just a little bit to go, but if we can wrap it up.
Okay, thanks. I think I'm almost there. Long-term finance, the company should be one that has capacity to eventually scale up and also get long-term finance for its scalability across borders or within the country. We expect the company to contribute to the grant, which is up to 350,000, up to at least 25%, but also contribute in the financing of implementation of the project. And this is our financial additionality. We want to see how best the DFCD can work with companies where they are challenged in accessing finance. This challenge was launched earlier in the year, and today in May, we are having this online live event. We expect applications to start coming through, even starting today, and end in June, after which we then run through an assessment screening of applications until September, when we select the winner in Kenya, and a winner in Uganda and a winner in Bangladesh, who will have the opportunity to obtain the 350,000 euro grant, but also have an opportunity to present their project at COP26 in Glasgow. And as indicated, this is the deadline for the application, and this is where you can get more information on the DFCD and make your application. I think that's about it.
Thank you, Tigera. And sorry to rushing you a little bit, but because we want to have enough time to interact also with all of our speakers in our panel. First of all, thanks to all the speakers, of course, and thanks for all the viewers again. For Tigera Muzena, you also dived a bit more deeper into the SOCNA. Just good to mention that, of course, the DFCD still, their challenge welcomes also projects in anywhere else in Kenya. But this was to give a bigger insight of them, and it was a good example to show the landscape model that we use. Let's start with our panel discussion. I have some questions here, and questions from the viewers will also come to me. But first of all, Art, I think you wanted to add on something.
Yeah, fantastic. I think Tigera really explained it clearly what the criteria are. Just to add one thing on it, there's not a maximum of the number of projects we can take on board from DFCD. Meaning that there will be maybe 3 projects that qualify the best, might go to the COP in Glasgow within a pitch, and maybe one of them being the most qualifiable during that event, and with an extra prize for capacity development of 100,000. But we can take on board far more projects. So this means actually there are no winners or losers. If we find much more projects in Kenya that qualify to work together with us up to and getting a contribution up to 350,000, that's really possible. Actually, we strive for far more projects than only one qualifying project from Kenya, just to be sure on that side.
Yeah, just to emphasize a bit more on that as well. While we wait for the other panelists to join us live again, then also moving on to you, maybe to ask you also a bit more. I see they're there. Then I'll get back to you with the startup business. But I wanted to ask Carol, what do you think we should, as or the DFCD as a financial institute, they should take into account to make sure that their approach best benefits the members, your members?
I think the part of what I think would be very useful is just that the engagement, and then putting a lot of information. I think what we've realized with a lot of our members, they want to get involved in things, but they feel like they don't know where to get all the information. So just a lot of information. I think that's what has lacked for a long time. So if there's a lot of information, there's a good partnership with us so that we know how we are circulating the information, and there's feedback, I think more people will be engaged.
Yeah, thank you. So then I hope this event is also very useful to in providing all of that information. Then I see we have a question from one of our viewers, Simon Tuo from Resilience Center. This question is to Nuru Mugambi. Can the DFCD support for de-risking climate investment increase bank lending to private sector? How do you see this?
Thank you very much, Melody, and thank you for the question. I think these types of programs are important. I shared some information around the de-risking aspect of similar funds. So there is a risk issue in the market right now because of COVID. You will see that as much as banks have repriced 54% of their portfolio, a lot of the activity is skewed towards trade, as it should. There's more employment in that space, but there are certain sectors, that agriculture, manufacturing, that are falling a little bit behind in terms of access to finance. So such programs are important in helping to de-risk, encourage more commercial lending, insurance, and venture capital to come in and support some of these businesses.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that. Then a question I wanted to ask to you, Art, but maybe also to Gera. We discussed a little bit more also about the startups, and you already mentioned a little bit about how you see that. But I'm also curious to hear whether, and I think that was one of the questions that we actually got from one of the registrations attendees, do you also fund the scale up for other existing projects?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's, if you look at existing projects or companies that want to scale up, then the first question we ask is whether they can already scale up without our help, because actually we want to be additional, we want to do something that's not done without our support. And if they say, no, we can't scale up, we really need some extra risk money available, and we have an interesting idea for scale up, and it has a really innovative element, then we are extremely happy to join efforts. Actually, it makes it sometimes even more easy for us because it's already an established project or company. But they really need us. If they don't need us and they can also get a funding from a local bank, then we don't do it. Yeah. So, and often we try to do it with pushing it, helping it develop it further with our consortium partners, SNV and WWF. Then that would be then actually the role for us, including a finance package. Yeah, yeah, and it's maybe also good that when you were actually talking, Jaron, about also how you see that the DFCD can help you in the scaling up of your project. If I can first ask you, Tigera, why is the project such a model project? Why is this one of the projects that we use that is funded and that is now also presenting? Can you explain a bit more on that?
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Melody. I think Amiran is a model project for us in a number of ways. They've been in the country, well established for quite a number of decades in Kenya. But if we look at their operations, they've expanded beyond East Africa. And this is the scalability we're talking about. We are prepared to support them to go beyond even where they are today. But we realize that they support climate change adaptation in a number of ways, short season variety of seeds, drought resistant or climate resistant seeds, pest resistant seed varieties, I think environment friendly chemicals and fertilizers, but also on the energy side, they supply renewable clean energy in the form of, say, solar implements or solar operated implements, and also biogas. In that respect, they help farmers then move their farming methods from an area where they are largely dependent on rain-fed water. If Amiran can help such clients to have a dam, I'm sure it's called a pan in their homestead, and have drip irrigation, we've seen such projects. And the example they gave in the video is one such, where even smallholder farmers who may not be able to approach a bank directly can go through Amiran, because we are supporting Amiran, and they get the assistance they need via Amiran's project Madaraka, which is providing credit finance to the smallholder farmers. So in a number of ways, we think Amiran is a good example for us. It's a model of a climate-friendly project that can be supported by the DFCD.
Yeah, Thank you. And Yaron, to you, actually, we discussed a lot of about blended finance, the uniqueness also of this fund. But I'm also curious to hear from you how you see the blended finance, or what has been your experience that you went through so far in financing the project of Amiran.
Sure. Yeah. So Madaraka so far has been financed by a combination of internal resources and support from Shell Foundation and previous programs of SMB. And that was really helpful to get a proof of concept together. Obviously, to get the alignment between the objectives of Amiran and the Balton Group and the objectives of different providers of climate finance. As I mentioned earlier, and Tigera also touched on, it also allowed us to start to introduce and explore new products that are complementary to the core product range, including those in renewable energy, which all together creates a solution for the farmer that really tackles their climate needs. However, the primary reason why primary agriculture is so difficult to finance is its long liquidity timelines, a huge amount of risks that farmers are exposed to, and the highly technical nature of their practice. There's probably no other human endeavor for profit that's subject to as much uncertainty and risks that are beyond the control of the farmer. So what we're trying to do here is use and leverage the expertise of Amiran to bring product solutions into the farmer, but then also get the financing right. And starting off with, as I mentioned, a more concessional model, but over time transition to a more commercially funded model, including our objective essentially is to bring in local financial institutions, because that brings the right kind of funding with the right kind of terms and obviously reduces currency risk, and combine that with more concessional blended finance providers who perhaps in the earlier stages are willing to take on more of the risk. And in our current phase of kind of scaling up from our pilot, we're already stepping into that in the first step with a combination of some concessional money and some interest-bearing money in our credit book. And so hopefully that then serves to build a track record of being able to provide debt servicing out of the liquidity of the credit book, and increase the participation of financial institutions in the financing of this credit book.
Thank you. Quick follow-up to you, Art. So the blended financing, how will that work for the DFCD? And do you have an estimate of how much finance can be combined around the DFCD? Because it could be some sort of a solution to also having more startups, but how can you do that?
Yeah, the first part, the blended finance part, in the first part of this session, we showed the graph, and where you see that the early development of projects often needs grant funding. Actually, we have 100% grant funding available there, up to 350,000. That's one. And the second part of the blended funding is in the long-term finance, where we indeed have kind of interest rates that are not market reflective if you look at the pure risk rate. So the blended finance part is from this early start until the long-term finance solution. And the finance solution, for instance, if you talk about debt, can be debt up to 12 to 15 years, really long-term involvement. How that can address the lower segment, I think that's also quite obvious, because if you use grant funding, if you use blended finance or concessional elements in funding, then you increase the accessibility, the affordability of finance towards the ultimate clients, which can be indeed smallholders from a cooperative or an outgrower schedule, what we work out, try to develop together with SMV and WWF, together with a cooperative or a microfinance institution, or a large company, an agriculture company that's building on the outgrower schedule. The lower the cost and versus the risk here, the better it is also for the ultimate smallholder or the ultimate small business Melody.
Yeah, and we're actually moving towards the end, and I will, we will in the end also want to, of course, tell you all the practicalities one more time, so you know what to do when you want to apply. Very quickly for you, Elizabeth, I'm curious to hear, we heard very different ways of how to do it. We are engaging with private actors, we're working together with the government. It's very important that we also work with the vulnerable groups and we put it as a graduate. So everything came all back together. And you said that you had the brokering role from the embassy. So I want to more give an open floor. Or what would you want to give as a takeaway to the viewers, or who do you want to encourage as the viewers that consider it to apply? And what best approaches do you see as the brokering role?
Yeah, thanks very much. And thanks all of you for such informative presentations and advice really for applicants and for us. And I think my number one message is just what incredible words from Art saying, you know, this is one challenge, but there's much more to come. So if there's good projects, there's finance for them. And that's something that's, you know, not always easy to say or see. So it's really wonderful to hear that. And then if you can see those links, as we've seen, to the farmers like Gideon and the projects like Madaraka, you can start to see truly how some of the big policy debates we have in Kenya and internationally about getting finance to where it's needed can become possible in a sort of sustainable fashion. And I really hope that including this climate lens, as Yaron says, allowing new products and bundled services to be, you know, provided, that we maybe crack the problems that we see in development cooperation in general as we try, you know, to improve productivity, whatever the goals are. I think there's been a bit of blindness when it comes to from the farmer's perspective, for example, a farmer, you know, the climate needs, as were mentioned. So I'm hoping that this fund is really addressing all of the kind of needs and risk management needs of the individual, and that's what we've seen. And we also in the embassy look to a very stark message about the counties that are contributing to growth in Kenya. And we are looking, and have been in the last year or so, to expand what we feel works in our development cooperation, including this fund now, to the more arid, semi-arid lands, including the counties mentioned in the landscape of southern Kenya, northern Tanzania. So we look forward to seeing what works well there, and would encourage applicants from don't feel that you wouldn't succeed. I think there are so many entrepreneurs and private sector entities of different scales. It's very diverse. There's domestic, international, there's individuals, SMEs, women-led SMEs in Kenya, really with good ideas. So don't feel this one's not for you. Give it a try and apply. From the embassy, we know so many of you already. Maybe there's some we don't know, and do reach out to us. We're an open door, in fact. You can find our contacts on the website, and keep us informed as well. When those of you who are successful, keep us informed of what you're achieving, because that really helps us as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Elizabeth, also for the invitation that you can ask your questions also and use them as the brokering role that they have. Then we've come to the final minute, actually over a minute of this event, the last event in the ones that we had on Uganda, Bangladesh, and today on Kenya. I want to give the final words actually to Art Mulder to tell you maybe briefly, you can only just tell the difference between DFCD and the challenge, because that we don't get those mixed up. And then tell us also, for everyone that wants to apply, how do we apply and when, most important.
Well, DFCD is the fund, and the challenge is actually what we discussed during this session. Actually, we invite everybody to come up with business models, and it's shown now on the screen. Please do that before the 30th of June. The website is also shown. There's also shown an email box if there are any further questions. And we have talked enough now. Doing makes a difference. Let's just do it and create locally led climate relevant projects via this initiative. I'm really looking forward to see all the applications coming in.
Thank you. Thank you to all the viewers at home. Thank you to all of our speakers. And if you're not convinced yet, we have a very brief video to leave you with. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, and stay for another few seconds to see everything on why you should apply now.
Are you dedicated to improving the quality and management of water, the resilience of agriculture, or the health and diversity of ecosystems within Kenya? Then apply and participate in the Scalable Climate Solutions Challenge. Go to www.thedfcd.com and find out more.